Hi teachers, my name is Sarah Smith. Welcome to Lead to Teach and welcome to our final session of Correct Me If I'm Wrong, where we're going to talk about how do you respond to disruptions? How do you prevent disruptions, distraction, even destruction from taking over your classroom setting? As always, you can download guided notes at leadtoteach.com, but I want to jump in with two pieces of recall before we get to today's content. Do you remember that we've said corrections include, most often, a non-vocal and vocal component? I'm going to show you or convey disapproval through body language, and I'm also going to tell you what it is I want you to change. However, if those two are not enough to change the behavior in question, then we would move to a redo or a removal. And a redo is what we talked about last time. A removal is what we'll talk about today. But do you remember that there is no hierarchy between the two? The one that you choose is context dependent. So let's review, if you don't mind, what are the 5 must-haves of a redo. We said, first of all, redos should be required immediately. If I have just stated my expectation or I've just given a vocal correction and there's still an infraction of the rule, the student or students still don't meet the expectation, then I'm immediately going to require the redo, assuming that's the appropriate intervention. I'm going to have the student or students return to the starting point. Right? We're going to try this behavior again. I'm going to restate my expectation super explicitly. This is what the behavior should look like this time. We're going to try it again this way. And then I'm going to give feedback as the students move. Affirmative or corrective. Yep, that's exactly what I wanted, or nope, that's still not quite right. We're going to continue practicing it again. And then, as we've done that, I'm going to state the future expectation of behavior. From now on, this is what I want the behavior to look like so that we don't have to keep doing redos all the time. Okay, so hoping that's familiar to you, let's jump now into removal. The definition of a removal is removing either the student, the object of disruption, or a reinforcer, kind of like we would do in real life. So I'll go through each of these in a little more detail in just a minute, but let's think about a real life example first, if you don't mind. This is a picture of my 2 cute nephews, and this is a picture of a fire that they had built with their dad on their property. And little Benjamin here was just so excited about this fire. He thought this was just the best thing ever, to the point that he found a box of matches and took them to his room, and luckily, told his older brother that he was planning to start a fire in his closet. I mean, does that just make your heart stop? And luckily, older brother went and told mom, and mom, my sister, was able to intervene and go talk to him and say, Benjamin, no. We don't ever play with matches in our bedroom, in the house, period. The only time you're allowed to use matches is if you're working with me or with dad, right? You have to be supervised. And what did she do? She removed the matches. She took the matches from him. Why? Because she wanted to prevent widespread destruction. And probably you think, well, yeah, in that case, I can see that's obvious that would be what you'd want to do. But I think in our classroom, it's necessary to take the same approach, to be willing to remove either a student, an object of disruption, or a reinforcer, because we don't want, do you remember our E word? We don't want escalation. We don't want a behavior to escalate to the point that it's out of control and requires a lot of outside interventions and resources and time. Okay, so let me go through an example then of when you might remove a student, an object, or a reinforcer. Let's suppose, in terms of student removal, that Ruby and Gwen are talking during calendar. And in removing a student, what I might say is, Ruby, go back to your seat until I think you're ready to sit quietly. And then I would invite her back after a period of time. Okay, let's suppose, in terms of removing an object of disruption, that Connor is playing with his pencil during instruction. So as you take the pencil, you might say something like, Connor, your arms are in power position. We're not touching pencils right now. Okay, let's suppose in terms of removing a reinforcer that your class is still talking even after you've given a vocal correction. You've asked for quiet and there's still some chattering or some whispering. In that case, I'm going to remove the class point while saying, my class, I've asked for mouths to be closed. I'm taking this point because we're closing our mouths now. And the idea in each of these is that you remove something that is being disruptive so that you stop the disruption from persisting. P.S. This is the only time we're going to talk about removing points or removing reinforcers. Why? Because it's not the rule, it's the exception. Do you remember that? We've talked about if you're going to remove a point, then you do that only rarely. Usually we would be either requiring a redo or removing a single student or an object of disruption. Okay, so let's talk about the top 5 removal must-haves in terms of objects. We'll jump in a minute to removing students, but let's just look at what do you have to be sure is in place if you want the removal of objects to be effective. Okay, and let's set up this scenario that the teacher has asked students to park their pencils and to sit in power position. In other words, I'm parking my pencil and I'm sitting ready to learn. And let's suppose that the students initially comply, but then Ty starts fidgeting with and tapping his pencil, and you can tell that he's not paying attention to instruction anymore. Well, you're not going to be surprised to hear that the very first step we take is to remove the object as immediately as possible. So the first second I've asked for students to park pencils, by the fourth second, Ty is tapping his pencil. By the 5th second, I'm going to remove that pencil. Why? Because I have just stated my expectation that pencils be parked. And you might be saying, but Sarah, you didn't give him an individual correction to park his pencil. And yeah, I could have tried that. But remember, if you have just stated an expectation or you've just given a correction, if either of those 2 criteria are met, then you can go for redo or removal. So I'm going to remove the object in this case as immediately as possible because I've just stated that expectation. Number 2 is as appropriate, you would want to restate your expectation, your initial expectation. Ty, I've asked for pencils to be parked. And the reason I say as appropriate is because if you're in the middle of a lesson and it's going to severely interrupt the flow of instruction, then maybe it's not appropriate to restate the expectation right then. Maybe you just do a removal. However, you would not want to skip this 3rd step regardless of the flow of instruction. At some point, you would want to state the contingency. And when I say at some point, I mean at some point pretty closely connected to the infraction of the rule. So the contingency, remember, is a statement of access, a state like I will give you this back after you meet this criteria. So the teacher might say, I'll give this back when I think you're ready to keep it parked. So I've removed it and I've stated when he's going to get it back, when I think he's ready to keep it parked. And then 4th, in our step of top 5 removal must-haves, is you would return the object after stating the expectation. So I might say something like, Ty, I'm happy to give this back to you if you're ready to keep it parked. And I'm going to set it down and I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to stay in front of Ty and make sustained eye contact and say, are you ready to keep it parked? Tell me yes or no. Are you ready? I'm not going to wait for that vocal or verbal confirmation because likely I'm going to get into a power struggle with the kids. So I'm not going to put myself in that situation. I'm just going to set the pencil down and walk away, knowing I can always do another removal or another redo, something like that, if there's continued infraction of the expectation. Okay, then 5th, last piece is that you would want to give feedback according to the student's compliance. So let's assume in this case that Ty did exactly what I asked him to and kept it parked. Pretty quickly, I'm going to want to say, Ty, much better. Thanks, dude. Thanks for fixing it. So that I motivate positively and not punitively. Okay, so I want to show you this video, removing an object from a student. And this is happening during whole group instruction. And all I want you to notice is how the removal is implemented. You're not going to see the whole scenario. You're not going to see the whole sequence, steps 1 through 5, but you will see how the object is removed in terms of removing it immediately, restating the expectation, and stating the contingency. Would you just look at what this looks like for removing an object? Or hands up, clap with me the word tumble. Ready? Tum-ble. For syllable, tum. Cole, I'm not okay with you using your mouth to do this. You're going to do it on paper. Tumble. Oh. I'll give this back to you when I think you're ready to follow directions with it. Okay, did you have a chance to notice those components? Remove object as immediately as possible. As I was walking around and monitoring what the students were doing, as soon as I saw Connor with the marker in his mouth trying to write the words, with the marker in his mouth, I beelined straight for him. I'm going to go straight for him because I already know that he knows the expectation for how we use whiteboard markers. And then restating the expectation in this case looked like, Cole, I'm not okay with you using your mouth to do this. And some of you might be thinking maybe you should have told him what to do instead of what not to do. And yeah, that's probably true. I could have said something like, I need you to use your hand to do this. But at any rate, we restate the expectation, even if it's not perfect, and then state the contingency. And did you hear what the contingency was? I'll give this back to you when I think you're ready to follow directions with it. And I traded him out a piece of paper for the whiteboard, and I'm going to give that whiteboard back when I think he's ready to use it appropriately. And you might be saying, well, when is that? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but in this case with Cole, because this was his first infraction of, using his mouth to write the whiteboard words, I would give it back before the end of the lesson. And maybe he does the last 2 or 3 words out of 10 with us on whiteboards. If this is a chronic problem and I'm having to take whiteboard away every day, maybe I just let him use the paper for longer. Maybe he uses the paper all that day and doesn't get whiteboard back until the next day, or even 2 days later, depending on the level of severity. Okay, here's a question teachers sometimes ask is, would I ever need to remove an object from the whole class? Like, would I ever need to take math manipulatives away from the whole class, for instance? And the answer is likely not. You'd want to consider in this case what's known as the 80% rule. The 80% rule is that you should have 80% compliance if you've been really clear about your expectations and if the task is appropriate. If those 2 criteria have been met and you still don't have at least 80% of kids meeting your expectation, then you probably need to clarify what that expectation is and then retry whatever the task is. So I would say, do you ever remove an object from the whole class? No. Could you remove a reinforcer from the whole class, a point from the whole class for not using math manipulatives appropriately? Yeah, but if you've got greater than 80% of kids not meeting that expectation, likely it's a clarity of expectations problem. Okay, here's another question teachers often ask is, how long then do I keep the object, Sarah? Like, they can't work if they don't have their pencils, and they can't work if they don't have their math manipulatives, so then I get into the problem of downtime and they don't have anything to do, so they're going to become disruptive. And yeah, that's absolutely true. So I'm going to give you a really, really, really general rule of thumb to say 1 minute-ish. It could be 30 seconds, could be 1:15, could be 2 minutes. I'm not so concerned about the length of time the object is removed for as I am the immediacy of removal. Why? Because I want to convey how serious I am about my expectations. If I've just given you an expectation and you don't meet that expectation, there's an immediate removal to signal that I meant what I said the first time I said it. So immediacy, not length, is the key to a removal. Which leads me to my next question. Did you notice what was common between the how-to of redos and removals? There was one element that was really common between those 2. And it was immediacy. How quickly you require the redo, how quickly you take the object or remove the student away in the face of disruption is what's going to convey to the students how serious you are about your expectations. Okay, so I have a video of a cute teacher with whom I worked a few years ago, and I just want you to notice what she says about the importance of immediacy in removals. Would you just listen to her perspective? Hi, Mimi.
Hi.
So tell me about manipulatives in math last year compared to this year.
Okay, so last year was a disaster. I used to think, wow, I can never use manipulatives in a math lesson again, which is unrealistic because with clocks you need them, and shapes, and even like measuring. Anyway, they're there. So you have to learn yourself how to handle it. So last year it was like, hey, I've told you 12 times, stop touching it, right? And that's not effective. I don't recommend that. So when Sarah came, she said, hey, 1 time, you're done, take it from them. And at first I was like, wow, that's kind of harsh. Like, but they need that. And this year I tried it from the beginning. 1 time, hey, sorry, do that again. They're mine. Go on about my business. See it happening again. I just go over and take it quietly. It doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be like, I've told you, give me that. Nope, it's just, sorry, those are mine. And you can show me you can do it again. I'll give them back. They go over there. We go about our lesson, and the eyeballs in the whole class go like this. She's serious. And from then on, I don't have problems. They put them right where they're supposed to be. And it has been more relaxing this time to pull out a manipulative and say, okay, I got this.
Okay, so another way of saying it is this, not that, right? When I see a little weed popping up, I want to pick it when I can still get it out with my 2 fingers. I do not want to let it grow to the point that now I need to use 2 hands and, oh, by the way, I better wear gloves and I probably need some tools and maybe some spray, and wow, now this is going to take an entire day and a lot of time, a lot of resources to overcome the problem. We don't want to let it escalate or grow to that point. We want to nip it in the bud, as my cute grandma used to say. Okay, so let's talk about top 5 removal must-haves in terms of removing a student. And would you see if you notice the similarities between removing objects and removing students? Do you notice the crossover here as we go through this? Okay, so here's our scenario. We're going to say that the teacher is inviting choral response while introducing new vocab words at the rug. So students are being invited to chorally respond. And Ruby and Gwen are whispering or giggling on the back row, even though I've just given them a correction. Ruby and Gwen, I need your eyes up here. You're saying it with me. And they're still whispering, giggling. What am I going to do? You're not surprised that you're going to remove one of the students as immediately as possible. Okay, so second one, I've asked for eyes up here. Say it with me. Let's suppose by the 4th second that these 2 students start to whisper and giggle again. So in my 5th second, the very next second, I'm going to remove one of those students. And as appropriate, I'm going to restate my expectation with the removal. Ruby, I asked for eyes up here, go back to your seat. So what was the expectation? It was eyes up here. Where's the removal? Go back to your seat. And then third, I'm going to state that contingency, right? A statement of access granted by meeting criteria. Ruby, I'll have you come back when I think you're ready to try it again. So as she's going back to her seat, as I'm excusing her back to her seat, I'm stating the contingency. I'll have you try it again when I think you're ready. And then after a period of time away, how long? That depends on the context. That depends on the student. In this case, maybe 2 minutes is appropriate. I would invite the student to return while stating my expectation. Ruby, you're welcome to join us if you're ready to keep your eyes up here. And guess what? Just like when I returned the object, I'm not going to make sustained eye contact and wait for verbal confirmation that she plans to comply and come back. I'm just going to say, if you're ready to try it again, you're welcome to join us on the rug. And I look away and I keep going with my lesson. Most likely she will return and join us, but if she doesn't, that's okay. As long as she's not disruptive at her seat, she can stay back there. And if she did become disruptive, I can always implement another consequence at a later time. So don't feel like just because the student doesn't return right then, all hope is lost. But typically, if you don't engage in a battle of wills, if you just say, okay, if you're ready to try it again, you're welcome to join us on the rug, typically the students will return, has been my experience. Okay, then 5th is, are you going to be surprised? Give feedback according to the student's compliance. So let's suppose this time that Ruby comes back and she still is poking the person in front of her. She's still not being totally quiet, or she's not being on task. I might say then, Ruby, go back to your seat. We'll practice this later. What? And I just went from a removal to a redo. Did you see that? Like, yeah, Ruby, we're now going to practice this at a later time. And I'm going to go through those same vocab cards as I just did with the whole group with Ruby. And she's going to practice keeping her hands in her lap and responding with me, not touching anyone around her. Of course, there won't be anyone around her to touch because we're doing an individual redo, but you get the idea that we're practicing the target behavior. Here's a question teachers often ask at this point, but what if I don't know which student started it? Guess what? Are you surprised to hear that's irrelevant? It doesn't matter whether Ruby or Gwen was the initial culprit. Why? Because immediacy, not accuracy, is the key. And because I'm not being harsh, I'm not being punitive with my approach. I'm simply saying, you can go back to your seat and we'll try it again in a minute, and inviting them back when I think they're ready to try it again. Again, we're going for immediacy, not being absolutely 100% sure who started it. Okay, in removing an object, removing a student, did you notice the similarities? Did you see these? In both cases, we're going to remove immediately. In the face of disruption, there's an immediate removal. Did you notice that we're going to restate the expectation? What should the behavior have looked like? And then we're going to state the contingency. How do you get the object back? How does the student return? And after that time away, then we either return the item or invite the student to return, and we give feedback according to the student's compliance, either affirmative or corrective, further corrective. So did you notice there really are a lot of similarities between these two categories of removal? Here's a question teachers ask then. Well, should I remove a student to the hall if we're at our seats? Like, I can't very well remove a student to the rug if we're all at our seats and that's where the disruption occurs. My opinion, my answer, what I've read in research, I would say no, absolutely not. Oh, there we go, we're back. I would remove the object of disruption. I might remove the student to a new area of the classroom, like a table or something. I might require a later redo, but I would avoid the hallway at all costs. Why? Because hallways tend to be some of the most reinforcing places in a school building. I've got lots of people walking by. I've got people that will interact with the student because they don't know that the student is on a quote-unquote timeout. There's a lot for the student to watch. That's really rich attention and rich escape in the face of disruption if I remove to the hallway. So I would avoid that at all costs. Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you 4 clips, and would you just check whether the student, the object, or the reinforcer is removed in each clip? Can you identify which is removed? If you both get it right, then you both get a point. It is okay to look at each other's... Brianna, I've asked for mouse to be closed. You're going to come and sit back here. It is okay to look at each other's and help each other. Fingers up or hands up. Clap with me the word tumble. Ready? Tum-ble. For syllable, tum. Cole, I'm not okay with you using your mouth to do this. You're going to do it on paper. Tumble. I'll give this back to you when I think you're ready to follow directions with it. Okay, so did you see that it was student, object, object, and student removed in each of those clips? Again, I'm not commonly removing reinforcers, but when I do, I'm just combining it with a vocal correction. What I need changed. Okay, so here's a question teachers always ask after seeing this 4th clip is they say, oh, Sarah, what if that little girl hadn't moved? Then what would you have done? And to be honest, I feel the same way every time I watch that clip. I always get a little bit nervous, and even though I know the outcome, I think, dang it, what am I gonna do? Move, move, move. And then she moves, and I instantly calm down. But what if she hadn't? Then what? Is all hope lost? Certainly not. Then I would probably just require a redo at a later point. When the other kids are accessing a music or art or PE or recess activity, then I'm going to say to her, Brianna, we're coming to our seats. We're going to practice this part again, maybe either the academic task, or I could even have her practice going back to her seat when I ask her to go back to her seat, since that's what the infraction was. That again would be context dependent based on the situation and based on what you know about your student, but I would probably just have required a redo later. And she's going to practice going back to her seat when I ask her to. Okay, if you don't mind, here's what I want to do last is go through 9 different disruptions that I see really, really commonly happen in classrooms. And I'm hoping you can think through what would be more effective, a redo or removal. And obviously you can push pause and play at will. I do think it would be valuable for you to pause this and think through the ideas on your own before I tell you what I would do, but you decide what works for you. Okay, here's the first disruption, is that the student is scribbling on a whiteboard. What would you do, a redo or a removal? And we've kind of already talked about this one, so probably it would make most sense to do a removal of the whiteboard and say, I've asked for everyone to write the words, I'm going to have you do this on paper. And then what I'm going to do is trade the student the whiteboard for the paper, because I keep half sheets of paper up near my instructional area so that I can quickly do that if I need to. A quick tip is to be most effective, this would require having paper immediately available. You want to have that paper ready to go. You don't want to make the rest of the class pause while you go find some paper and take it to the student in question and then hand it to them while stating that expectation. Why? You want the rest of the class to keep working. We're preventing sabotage at all costs. Okay, let's suppose next disruption is you have a student lying down on the rug. What do? Possibly you remove the student and say something like, Jed, I'm going to have you go back to your seat until I think you're ready to sit up. And it might be as simple as that. Should the student get to choose when he or she rejoins the group? My answer and what I've read in the research would be that no, you don't have the student choose when to rejoin the group if you want to maintain control of the disruption. You as the teacher are the authority figure in the classroom, and we would no more let the kid decide when to come back than we would let a prisoner tell the judge after 2 weeks, okay, I think I'm good, I think I'm done. I know it was a life sentence, but I'm good. So typically, no, the student would not choose when they got to rejoin the group. And I say typically because the exception to that would be if you've said, Jed, if you're ready to sit up at the rug, you're welcome to join us again. And maybe he doesn't come in the first minute, but maybe he comes in the second minute, then that would be okay. But you've still stated that it would be okay for him to do that at that point. Okay, disruption number 3, students are taking too long to line up after recess. What do you do? Possibly you would do a redo in this case where you say, when I blow the whistle, I expect everyone to line up immediately. That means you come right away. So we're going to practice that. And maybe you do the practice right then. Maybe you do the practice before they access some sort of privilege. But either way, you do a redo and maybe even get out a timer. I expect it to take less than a minute. You're going to go practice playing anywhere on the playground. Go as far away as you can, and you're going to get here before my timer says 1 minute. Go. Okay, disruption number 4. Let's suppose everyone is lining up quickly from recess except one student. Ugh, do you have the whole class practice when just one student is not lining up quickly? Of course, the answer is no. So what would you do? In that case, you might remove access to the entire playground. So it's still a removal, but it's not removal to sitting against the wall or not having recess at all. It's just saying, guess what? I'm going to have you play here in this area near the swings and near this patch of grass so that I know you'll hear the whistle when it's time to line up. And so maybe I don't remove recess completely because I don't agree with removing recess from kids ever, but maybe I remove access to the entire playground. Let's suppose that you have a student who is hurting other students on the playground. So they are lining up quickly, but if they're being aggressive on the playground, could you do the same thing? Could you remove access to the entire playground? Ben, I'm going to have you play in this area until I see that you can keep your hands to yourself. And you give Ben an assigned area in which to play so he can still play, he can still expend some of that energy and have a chance to socialize. But if kids choose to leave and go to another area and not play with him, he's still confined to this area until he shows that he can keep his hands to himself. Quick tip is that you as the teacher may want to release that recess parameter very gradually in order to maintain safety. As you see that the student is able to meet the expectation to act safely, to keep his or her hands and feet to self, then you could say, okay, you've done a great job on the swings and on this patch of grass. Do you think you're ready to add this other little area of playground? Do you think you're ready to use that playground area and still keep your hands to yourself? And if so, then we're going to try that for a day or two. And if that goes well, then maybe I'll add the soccer field. And I gradually increase every day or two the parameters the student has based on appropriate behavior. Okay, disruption 6. Students are following the teacher around the classroom. Don't you hate when that happens? Is there anything you can do about it? You can remove your attention, right? Oh, I can only talk to you if you go to your seat and you raise a quiet hand. So remove teacher attention. Disruption 7, let's suppose student works ahead on a whole group assignment. Oh man, they're not supposed to do that, and then they don't have anything to do, so there's downtime, which increases disruption. What do you do in this case? Possibly require a redo of the work. Maybe I erase the writing that the student has done in working ahead and say, oh, guess what? This only counts if you do it right with me. I'm going to have you do it again. Could the argument also be made that this is the removal of work that's been done when it wasn't supposed to be? Yeah. So however you want to frame it, the idea is that the work only counts if the student does it right with you or at the time that you say they're supposed to be working on it. Here's a quick tip for this, similar to the whiteboard paper, is that you would want to have an eraser immediately available if you're going to do this so that the class can keep working. I see a couple teachers who wear little aprons that I think they just got for free from Home Depot. Isn't that funny? And they just keep little erasers in their apron pocket and pull it out as they walk around and monitor the class so that they can erase if kids work ahead. And initially what I see in these settings is they do have to erase at the beginning of the year, but after that they don't, because kids stay right with them and stay on task because they know that the work will be removed or that it will need to be redone if it's done outside of teacher expectations. Okay, disruption number 8, second to last, ready? Student isn't getting right to work. Oh, what do? You could remove the student to a different area if you're afraid that it's because of peer distraction that student is talking. You could just say, I'm going to have you come work at this table over here. Or you as the teacher could redo your teacher prompt. I'm going to have you stay during art and practice working the whole time. So we're going to redo that whole scenario. When I say it's time to work, then you're going to work, and I'm going to have you do it when the other kids are doing something else. And at that point, it might be appropriate to require limited problems, depending on the length of the assignment. Maybe I'm not having the student complete all the math tasks, just long enough to show compliance, 5 minutes or something. So you decide based on context, but you could do a removal or a redo. Okay, last one, ready? Students are calling out during instruction. Are you going back to our call out video? You could remove attention, right? Shake your head, finger to lips. Oh, mouths are closed, right? You could do that. Or again, you could redo your teacher prompt. I'm going to say that again, and this time nobody will say anything. This might be most appropriate if you have a lot of whole group calling out. So for instance, I might say to the kids, guess what? We're having an assembly today. And a lot of kids start exclaiming and responding to that statement. I might say, oh, our mouths are closed. I'm going to say that again. And this time when I say we're going to have an assembly today, you're still just going to sit ready to hear about the assembly. So your mouths are closed. And then I would say, we're going to have an assembly today, and I want to talk about what that will look like. Oh, much better. And I'm giving feedback according to compliance. So again, that could be a removal or a redo. Okay, last question, as always, is what did you like or learn about correcting disruptions? What stuck out to you? For me, it's this idea that the most important factor in a correction is responding immediately. That's not something I think I would have told you going into the classroom and when I first started learning more about corrections. But the more classrooms I've visited, the more experience I have, the more I realize it's this immediacy that often conveys the teacher's seriousness about the expectation. So even if you can't remember every single step, and even if you find yourself fumbling a little bit as you try to wrap your head around how removals and redos work, I would say responding immediately in the face of the disruption is probably what's going to make or break your effectiveness. Okay, thus concludes responding to disruptions. Okay, see you next time.